They called them Ms., Mr. Pink, and Panda, code names for a slick drug trafficking operation that flooded Leicestershire with crack cocaine and heroin. But behind the branding was a brutal enterprise led by 30-year-old Takavada Zinyoro and backed by a close-knit team, including brothers Saqib and Aqib Shah. Publicly, the gang appeared to be just another faceless network, but inside, it was deeply organized, predatory, and reliant on child exploitation. Zinyoro's outfit wasn't just about drugs, it was about control. The gang groomed vulnerable children, some as young as 15, to deliver their product and carry their cash, insulating senior members from street-level risk. They used burner phones and encrypted messages to coordinate drops. They divided operations across 3 county lines, Ms., Mr. Pink, and Panda, and delegated responsibilities among a structured hierarchy. The leadership included Mohammed Abdur, the Shah brothers, Huzaifa Lorgat, Farhan Choudhury, and Sian Warner. Each played a critical role, from cooking crack to couriering bundles. But Leicestershire police were watching. After a detailed investigation involving surveillance, phone analysis, and testimonies, they brought the network crashing down. 14 people were arrested and charged. What began as a covert, multi-layered operation ended with prison sentences totaling more than 80 years. The network began quietly, with a few burner phones and a small group of trusted associates. At the core was Takavada Zinyoro, already active in drug supply and looking to expand. He wasn't just building a team, he was building infrastructure. By launching 3 branded drug lines, Ms., Mr. Pink, and Panda, Zinyoro created a framework that allowed for large-scale distribution while masking the people at the top. Each line was designed to run semi-independently, keeping suppliers, couriers, and street dealers separated by layers of communication. The gang recruited from within Zinyoro's circle. Mohammed Abdur, operating under the alias Mohammed Raqib, became one of his key lieutenants. The Shah brothers, Saqib and Aqib, were placed in charge of the Panda line, while others like Huzaifa Lorgat took on drug preparation. Crucially, they began targeting vulnerable young people, some under 16, luring them into the business with promises of money and protection. As the network grew, so did its ambition. By mid-2023, the gang had entrenched itself in Leicester, Loughborough, and surrounding areas. They were moving heroin and crack in volume, using children to deliver, store, and sometimes even sell drugs. To the outside world, it looked like a few scattered street deals. In reality, it was the foundation of a sprawling operation. Once the foundations were laid, Zinyoro's gang moved quickly to expand their county lines model. Each of the 3 branded drug lines, Ms., Mr. Pink, and Panda, was linked to a dedicated burner phone, controlled centrally by trusted gang members. These phones became the command centers of the operation, sending out bulk texts advertising heroin and crack cocaine, receiving orders, and directing street-level deliveries. The gang's efficiency hinged on this system: anonymous, fast, and hard to trace. Distribution depended on a network of exploited teenagers, often aged between 15 and 17. These young runners were the gang's most visible presence, but also their most vulnerable. The children were groomed through social media, word of mouth, and peer pressure. Some were promised easy cash, others threatened into compliance. They were placed in temporary trap houses, often flats or homes taken over by the gang, where they'd store drugs, handle deliveries, and sometimes live for days at a time. Sian Warner played a key role in this. She allowed her home to be used as a dealing base and personally recruited and harbored children for the gang. Her involvement gave the operation a veneer of legitimacy and provided the cover needed to avoid early detection. Transport was another pillar. Farhan Choudhury acted as a courier, ferrying drugs and cash between stash houses, line holders, and street dealers. Meanwhile, Huzaifa Lorgat was responsible for preparing the crack cocaine for sale, ensuring consistency and scale in supply. Each gang member had a clearly defined role. The Shah brothers managed the Panda line. Mohammed Abdur supported Zinyoro directly, overseeing operations and logistics. It was a tightly run system, designed to function like a business, ruthless, organized, and entirely focused on profit, regardless of who got hurt. The gang's grip on Leicestershire's drug trade wasn't just about supply, it was about power. Control was exercised through fear, manipulation, and a calculated use of young people as expendable assets. The decision to involve children wasn't incidental, it was strategic. Younger dealers were less likely to attract police attention and, if caught, faced lighter sentencing. For the leadership, this created a buffer, a protective layer between them and the streets. Takavada Zinyoro sat at the top, insulated from direct exposure. His orders were passed down through trusted lieutenants like Mohammed Abdur and the Shah brothers. Every role was compartmentalized. Some prepared the drugs, others managed the phones. Runners rarely knew who was above them. This structure made it harder for law enforcement to trace the command chain. Communication was key. The gang used burner phones for each line, switching them regularly. Messages were often sent en masse, alerting users to new stock. Orders came in quickly, sometimes dozens a day, and runners were dispatched within minutes. This responsiveness helped the gang build a steady customer base and kept cash flowing. Intimidation ensured compliance. Runners who stepped out of line or lost money were threatened or assaulted. Some were forced into debt to the gang, a tactic used to trap them in ongoing service. Adults involved in the operation maintained strict discipline, enforcing rules through violence or the threat of it. Even housing played a role in control. Safe houses weren't just for storing drugs. They doubled as holding areas for exploited children, isolating them from outside contact. These locations were moved frequently, further disorienting the runners and making it harder for them to escape. Through this blend of structure, violence, and exploitation, Zinyoro's gang kept its hold, until cracks began to form. For a long time, the Mr. Pink, and Panda operation moved with precision. Its strength lay in separation. Different phones, different runners, different lines. The leadership, especially Takavada Zinyoro, believed they were untouchable. But behind the scenes, cracks had begun to form, and law enforcement were quietly closing in. Leicestershire police had been receiving reports of suspicious activity across the county. Community members flagged homes with constant foot traffic, young people seen entering and leaving at odd hours, and unfamiliar teenagers loitering in alleyways and stairwells. These weren't isolated incidents, they were patterns, and they matched known county lines tactics. Safeguarding teams began raising the alarm too. Several vulnerable children previously flagged as at risk had gone missing for days at a time. When they returned, they had money, new clothes, and vague explanations. Some were found in flats far from home, confused and frightened. Their stories, pieced together by social workers and police, pointed to a coordinated grooming and exploitation operation. Police intelligence units began working on the phone numbers connected to local drug complaints. The Mr. Pink, and Panda lines were all tied to bulk messaging, consistent drug orders, and contact with known addicts. Once linked, These phones became the focus of a full-scale surveillance effort. Officers tracked who carried the handsets, where they traveled, and who they met. Undercover work and plainclothes patrols identified several addresses being used as trap houses. Inside, police later found drugs, cash, burner phones, and sometimes terrified children. These discoveries solidified suspicions and gave officers the legal basis to start making arrests. But the biggest breakthroughs came from the phones themselves. Once seized, forensic analysis exposed everything: messages between gang members, delivery instructions, customer lists, even notes on which runners owed what. The hierarchy was no longer hidden. The same system that had kept Zignoro and his inner circle insulated was now betraying them. As younger gang members began to talk, whether out of fear, pressure, or a chance to escape, names started emerging, roles were clarified, locations were confirmed. The myth of the untouchable network was crumbling. The operation's downfall was now a matter of time, and the clock was running out. By the end of 2024, Leicestershire police had everything they needed. Months of surveillance, digital forensics, community intelligence, and safeguarding referrals had laid bare the entire structure of the Mr. Pink, and Panda operation. It was now time to act, and the response was swift, coordinated, and unrelenting. Simultaneous raids were planned across Leicester, Loughborough, and several surrounding areas. Officers from multiple departments, including the force's serious and organised crime unit, local neighbourhood teams, and child protection specialists, executed warrants at dawn. Doors were forced in. Phones, drugs, cash, and weapons were seized. Children found inside the properties were immediately safeguarded and removed from the scene by specialist officers and social workers. Key figures were taken into custody that day. Takavada Zignoro was arrested without incident at a flat in Leicester where he had been staying under an alias. Mohammed Abdur, a central lieutenant and trusted enforcer, was caught attempting to destroy a mobile phone as police breached his address. The Shah brothers, Saqib and Aqib, were found operating out of a small terraced property with cash hidden in cereal boxes and crack cocaine wrapped and ready for sale. Sian Warner's arrest was a pivotal moment. She had been instrumental in the gang's ability to harbour and control young runners. When officers entered her home, they found 2 teenage boys, both under 17, who had been missing from local authority care for over a week. Warner was charged not just with conspiracy to supply drugs, but with child trafficking offences under the Modern Slavery Act. Forensic analysis of phones, alongside direct testimonies from some of the exploited teenagers, built a near watertight case. The children were initially reluctant to speak, but after being moved to safety and supported by specialist teams, several began to provide detailed accounts of their roles, how they had been recruited, and the fear they lived under. The evidence was overwhelming. The gang had left a digital footprint on nearly every device they used: text orders, location pings, notes, and financial records. Ballistic searches of homes turned up weapons, including knives and a replica firearm used to intimidate rival dealers. In total, 14 people were charged as part of the takedown. Each played a different role: leadership, logistics, prep, transport, or street-level sales. The CPS built a case around conspiracy to supply Class A drugs, modern slavery offences, and child exploitation. The operation had been large, but it collapsed quickly. Zignoro and his crew hadn't planned for the loyalty of their youngest members to break down under pressure, nor for the technology they relied on to become their downfall. The takedown of the Mr. Pink, and Panda network wasn't just a major strike against Leicestershire's drug trade, it was a statement. County lines gangs could be infiltrated, dismantled, and brought to justice. This time, there were no aliases, no burner phones, and no escape. Only the slow walk into custody and the long sentences to come. The trial of the Ms., Mr. Pink, and Panda Network marked the conclusion of one of Leicestershire's most complex and significant county lines investigations. 14 defendants stood before the court, each charged with multiple counts of conspiracy to supply Class A drugs. Several also faced modern slavery charges related to the grooming, recruitment, and exploitation of children. The courtroom was packed, with family members, journalists, and, crucially, professionals from safeguarding services who had supported the young victims throughout the case. Leading the criminal enterprise was Takavada Zinyoro, 30. The judge described him as the architect and orchestrator of a cynical, profit-driven operation that showed contemptuous disregard for the lives of vulnerable children. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison. His conviction reflected not only his leadership in the supply of heroin and crack cocaine, but also his pivotal role in the recruitment and manipulation of minors for frontline dealing. Mohammed Abdur, 26, also known as Mohammed Rakib, acted as Zinyoro's right hand. He managed operations on the ground and enforced discipline across the network. For his part in the conspiracy and for his coordination of the Mr. Pink line, he was jailed for 11 years. Saqib Shah, 24, and Aqib Shah, 22, ran the Panda line. The brothers handled daily logistics, maintained contact with street dealers, and managed the storage and packaging of drugs. They were sentenced to 9 years and 7 years, respectively, with the judge noting their integral role in a highly organized operation. Huzaifa Lorgat, 26, was convicted of preparing and packaging crack cocaine. His fingerprints were found on drug wraps recovered from multiple properties, and evidence from phones showed he arranged several deliveries. He was sentenced to 8 years. Farhan Choudhury, 22, acted as a courier, moving money and drugs between safe houses. He played a lower-tier but still essential role. His sentence, 6 years in custody. One of the most significant convictions was Sian Warner, 32. Unlike others, she was not involved in supply or preparation. Her crime was enabling the gang's exploitation model. She provided housing to children working the lines, recruited vulnerable teenagers into the gang, and acted as a carer while they sold drugs from her home. Warner was convicted under the Modern Slavery Act and received 8 years in prison. The judge said her actions were deliberate, sustained, and driven by financial gain, with no regard for the welfare of the children she exploited. Other individuals, including line handlers, stash house operators, and street-level supervisors, received sentences ranging from 3 to 6 years, depending on their level of involvement and prior records. Throughout the sentencing, the court placed heavy emphasis on the gang's systematic exploitation of children. Several victims had given statements detailing the emotional toll, fear, and isolation they experienced. One teenager described being passed between houses like a package, while another said he never knew if I was going to be arrested, robbed, or killed. The judge praised the police and safeguarding teams for their handling of the case, particularly their work in identifying and supporting the young victims. The sentencing made clear that using children in drug supply would not only lead to lengthy prison terms, but would also bring modern slavery charges, a growing tactic in county lines prosecutions. In total, the 14 gang members were sentenced to more than 84 years in prison. The dismantling of the Ms., Mr. Pink and Panda lines marked a turning point in Leicestershire's fight against organised drug crime. It demonstrated that no operation, no matter how structured or spread out, was beyond reach. The message was unambiguous. If you exploit children to sell drugs, there will be nowhere to hide, and no leniency when justice comes. The sentencing in the Mr. Pink and Panda case reflected the seriousness of the offences, but some would argue it didn't go far enough. While 84 years collectively may sound significant, several of the gang's key members will serve less than a decade behind bars. Considering the scale of the operation, the volume of drugs moved, and the sustained exploitation of children, there is a case to be made for even harsher penalties. County lines operations like this one continue to thrive across the UK. The business model is replicable, and in many cases, the void left by one takedown is quickly filled by another group. Young people are still being groomed, flats are still being turned into trap houses, and branded drug lines continue to operate openly via text.